Jake Thompson had been running his food cart on Terminus Station for exactly 4 months, and he was pretty sure he'd made the worst business decision of his life. The docking district was supposed to be prime real estate, thousands of travelers passing through every week from dozens of different worlds. But most of them weren't interested in human food, and the ones who were could barely afford his prices after paying for fuel and docking fees. Tonight was particularly slow. He'd sold maybe 6 meals all day, and the rent on his cart space was due in 3 days. Jake wiped down the grill for what felt like the 100th time, watching the grease swirl under his cloth. Back on Earth, his sister had warned him. She'd said chasing dreams halfway across the galaxy was a stupid idea for a guy who barely graduated high school. Maybe she'd been right. The station's artificial evening cycle had kicked in an hour ago, dimming the overhead lights to a soft orange glow that was supposed to mimic sunset. Most of the other vendors had already packed up and gone home. Jake was about to do the same when he caught movement in his peripheral vision. 3 small shapes stood at the edge of his cart's light pool, just barely visible in the shadows between storefronts. Kids. Alien kids from the looks of them. Their skin had this pale blue tint that seemed to absorb the station's lighting, and their eyes were huge, way bigger than human proportions would allow. They couldn't have been more than 3 or 4 feet tall, even the biggest one. They weren't approaching. Just standing there watching him work. Specifically watching the burger he just made for himself sizzle on the grill. Jake had seen plenty of weird things since leaving Earth, but something about these kids made his chest tighten. Maybe it was the way they stood so perfectly still like they were trying not to be noticed. Or maybe it was their clothes, threadbare and stained, hanging loose on too thin frames. Or maybe it was just that universal look of hunger that transcended species. He'd been that kid once. Different circumstances, different planet, but he remembered what it felt like to stand outside a restaurant and smell food you couldn't afford. "Hey," he called out, keeping his voice gentle. "You kids hungry?" They flinched at being addressed directly. The tallest one, a girl Jake guessed though he honestly had no idea how to tell with their species, put her arms out protectively in front of the smaller two. "It's okay," Jake said, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "I'm not gonna hurt you. Just asking if you want some food." The 3 kids looked at each other, having some kind of silent conversation. Finally, the tall one took a hesitant step forward into the light. She was wearing what looked like it had once been a nice jacket, but now it was torn at the shoulder and missing buttons. She patted her pockets and shook her head. The meaning was clear: no money. "Did I ask for money?" Jake flipped the burger and grabbed 3 more patties from his cooler. "Look, it's the end of my shift. This stuff's just gonna go to waste anyway. You'd actually be doing me a favor." It was a lie. He'd planned to eat that food himself over the next few days. But the way the smallest kid's eyes tracked the movement of his spatula made something crack open in Jake's chest. He loaded up 3 paper plates with burgers, fries, and even added some of the expensive cheese he usually charged extra for. The kids crept closer, moving as a unit, the older one always keeping herself between her siblings and Jake. When he held out the first plate, the girl stared at it like it might vanish if she blinked. Then she took it with both hands so carefully it was like she was handling something precious. "Thank you," she whispered in heavily accented English. Jake blinked in surprise. "You speak English?" She nodded once, then distributed the other plates to her siblings with military precision. The middle kid got the bigger burger, the smallest got extra fries. She kept the smallest portion for herself. They didn't run off. Instead, they sat right there on the ground near his cart and ate like they hadn't seen food in days. Maybe they hadn't. The smallest one made these little happy sounds with each bite, and the middle kid kept touching the cheese like it was magic. Jake tried not to stare, busying himself with wiping down surfaces that were already clean. When they finished, all 3 of them carefully stacked their plates and brought them back to his counter. "Good?" Jake asked. The tall girl nodded firmly. "Very good. Thank you, sir." "Jake. Name's Jake." He pointed to himself. "And you don't gotta call me sir. Makes me feel old." She seemed to consider this, then pointed to herself. "I am." She paused, struggling with the words, then said something in her own language that sounded like musical chimes. "That's pretty," Jake said, "but I'm never gonna pronounce that right. You mind if I just call you Blue? You know, 'cause of..." He gestured vaguely at his own skin, then at hers. She tilted her head, processing, then gave a small smile. "Well, okay. These your siblings?" Blue nodded and pulled them closer. The protective gesture was answer enough. "Where's your folks?" The smile vanished. Blue's expression went completely blank and she shook her head once. "Not, I don't know. More like, I'm not talking about that." Jake recognized that look too. He'd worn it himself plenty of times as a kid when adults asked too many questions. All right, fair enough. He started packing up his cart for real now. You kids got somewhere safe to sleep tonight? Blue hesitated, then nodded. Another lie, Jake suspected, but he didn't push. Well, listen. I'm here every day, same time. If you get hungry again? He shrugged. I always make too much food anyway. He wasn't sure they understood until Blue grabbed her siblings' hands and bowed slightly. Then they disappeared into the station's corridors like ghosts, leaving Jake alone with his cooling grill and a strange ache in his chest. He told himself it was a one-time thing. A good deed to balance out the universe's scales. But the next evening, right around the same time, 3 small blue shapes appeared at the edge of his cart's light. And Jake found himself smiling as he reached for extra burger patties. 3 weeks had passed since that first night, and Jake's evening routine had completely changed. He wasn't just cooking for customers anymore. Around 6 o'clock every day he'd start setting aside portions. Extra burgers, fresh fries, whatever looked good that day. By the time the station's artificial sunset kicked in, he'd have 3 plates ready and waiting. Blue and her siblings never missed a day. They'd appear like clockwork, emerging from whatever hiding spots they'd claimed in the station's endless maze of corridors. The youngest one had started running up to the cart now, all earlier fear forgotten. The middle kid, Jake had started calling him Cheese because of his obsession with anything dairy, would peek over the counter to watch Jake cook, fascinated by every flip and sizzle. Blue herself had begun staying after meals to help clean up. She was quick, efficient, and learned faster than any employee Jake had ever tried to hire. She'd figured out his entire system within days, which supplies went where, how he liked things stacked, even the weird quirk of his grill's left burner running hotter than the right. You don't have to do this, you know, Jake told her one evening as she scrubbed down his prep counter. The food's free either way. Blue paused, her cleaning cloth dripping soapy water. You give us food. We give help. Fair. Kid, you're like 10 years old. You should be playing or going to school or something, not working. 12, she corrected him. And we pay back kindness. Is right thing. Jake didn't argue after that. The truth was, he liked having them around. The station could be a lonely place, especially for a guy whose only friend back on Earth was his sister, and she'd stopped returning his calls after he'd left. These kids brought life to his little corner of the docking district. But he was starting to notice things that worried him. Blue was getting thinner. He'd catch her sneaking food from her own plate onto her siblings when she thought he wasn't looking. The youngest had developed this cough that rattled in her chest, getting worse every day. And all 3 of them had this haunted look sometimes, like they were constantly watching the corridors for something dangerous. The other vendors had noticed the kids too. Maria ran the fruit stand 2 carts down, a tough woman from New Mexico who'd been selling produce on the station for 15 years. She'd watched Jake feeding the alien kids for over a week before she said anything. You running a charity, Thompson? She asked one afternoon, her arms crossed over her chest. Jake shrugged, defensive. Just feeding some kids. That a crime? Maria's expression softened. She glanced over at the 3 small aliens who were sitting in their usual spot against the wall, the youngest one coughing into her sleeve. They got family? Someone looking after them? If they do, I haven't seen them. Maria studied the kids for a long moment, then nodded once like she'd made a decision. The next morning, Jake found a crate of fresh apples sitting beside his cart with a note that just said, "For the little ones." After that, it was like a dam had broken. Tom from the bakery started bringing over day-old bread and pastries. Still perfectly good, he insisted, just not pretty enough to sell at full price. The Centauri who ran the spice shop contributed these weird purple fruits that the kids devoured like candy. Even Bill, the grumpy old mechanic who fixed hover carts and usually snarled at everyone, showed up one day and repaired Jake's faulty cooling unit without being asked. Can't have those kids eating warm food, Bill had muttered, refusing to make eye contact. Bad for digestion. Aliens got sensitive stomachs. Jake wasn't sure if that was true, but he thanked Bill anyway and pretended not to notice the way the old man's eyes got watery when the youngest kid hugged his leg. The change in his business was harder to explain. Word seemed to spread somehow, though Jake had no idea how. Customers started showing up specifically to eat at his cart. Travelers who'd go out of their way passing fancier restaurants just to buy one of his simple burgers. They'd smile at the kids, leave tips that seemed way too generous and say things like, "Heard you're good people," or "Keep doing what you're doing." Jake's income doubled, then tripled. For the first time since opening his cart, he wasn't worried about making rent. But money couldn't fix everything. The youngest kid's cough was getting worse, bad enough that Jake could hear the wheeze in her breathing even from across the cart. He'd mentioned doctors twice now, and both times Blue had looked at him with absolute terror in her eyes. "No doctors," she'd said firmly. "No authorities. Please, Jake. Kid, your sister needs medicine. They take us if we go to doctors. They call station services. We get separated, sent to different places. Different systems maybe." Blue's English had improved dramatically over the past weeks, which somehow made her words hit harder. "We stay together or we have nothing left. What about your parents? Your family?" Blue's face went carefully blank. "Gone." That one word carried the weight of a story Jake suspected would break his heart if he heard the full version. He'd stopped pushing after that, but the problem hadn't gone away. The little one's cough got worse every day, and Jake lay awake at night in his cramped apartment, staring at the ceiling and trying to figure out what the hell he was supposed to do. His apartment was barely big enough for one person, a converted storage unit that the landlord had slapped a bathroom into and called cozy efficiency living. The bed folded down from the wall, the kitchen was 3 square feet of counter space, and the whole place smelled faintly of the station's recycled air. But it was warm. It was dry. It was safe. Jake made his decision on a Thursday night when the temperature in the docking district dropped and he found all 3 kids huddled together for warmth, the youngest one shaking with fever. "Okay, that's it. Grab whatever stuff you've got. You're coming with me." Blue's eyes went wide. "Jake, we cannot." "Yeah, you can. And you are. Come on." He half expected them to run. Instead, Blue gathered her siblings close and whispered something in their language. They looked up at Jake with expressions so full of desperate hope that he had to turn away. They didn't have much to gather. A torn blanket. A small bag with what looked like a few pieces of clothing. That was it. Everything 3 kids owned in the universe fit in one bag small enough for the youngest to carry. The walk to Jake's apartment took 10 minutes. Blue kept looking over her shoulder like she expected station security to jump out and grab them. Her siblings pressed close to her sides, the youngest one's cough echoing off the corridor walls. When Jake opened his door and gestured them inside, they hesitated on the threshold. "It's okay," he said quietly. "You're safe here. I promise." Blue was the first to step inside. She looked around the tiny space, taking in the fold-down bed, the miniature kitchen, the bathroom barely bigger than a closet, and her eyes filled with tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you, Jake." He pulled down the bed and gave them the only pillow he owned. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow we'll figure out medicine for the little one. Where you sleep?" Jake grabbed his winter coat from the closet and spread it on the floor. "Right here. Now stop asking questions and rest." He lay awake most of that night, listening to 3 alien kids breathe in the darkness and wondering what the hell he'd gotten himself into. The medical scanner cost Jake 300 credits on the station's black market, almost a week's worth of profit, even with his improved business. The dealer, a sketchy Tellurian with too many arms, had asked no questions and kept no records. That was exactly what Jake needed. He had no idea how to read the alien symbols that scrolled across the scanner screen when he waved it over the youngest kid. The device beeped and hummed, displaying what he assumed was medical data in a language he couldn't understand. But the dealer had included a basic translation chip, and after fumbling with it for 20 minutes, Jake managed to get something resembling English. Respiratory infection. Moderate severity. Recommended treatment appeared as a long chemical name he couldn't pronounce. Another 200 credits at a shady pharmacy got him the medicine. The pharmacist, human, thankfully, had raised an eyebrow at the prescription but handed over the pills without comment when Jake paid in cash. "Give her one every 12 hours with food," the pharmacist had said. "Should clear up in a week. But if it gets worse, she really should see a real doctor." Jake had nodded and left before any more questions could be asked. The medicine worked. Within 3 days, the rattling cough had eased. Within a week, the little one was breathing normally again, her blue skin returning to its proper shade instead of that awful gray it had turned. But Jake's problems were multiplying faster than he could solve them. His work schedule had become a disaster. He'd open the cart late because the kids needed breakfast. He'd close early because they couldn't be left alone too long. Some days he'd have to shut down in the middle of lunch rush because Cheese had wandered off and Blue was panicking, searching the corridors with that look of absolute terror in her eyes. The station manager, a bureaucratic nightmare named Phillips, had called him in twice already. "Mr. Thompson, your vending license requires consistent operating hours," Phillips had said, his voice dripping with the kind of satisfaction people get from enforcing petty rules. "You've violated the terms of your agreement 14 times in the past 2 weeks. I had some personal emergencies. I don't care if your mother died. The rules are the rules. One more violation and I'm revoking your license. Understood. Jake had understood perfectly. He was running out of time. His savings account was hemorrhaging money. 3 kids ate a lot more than one adult and they were growing. He'd already had to buy Cheese new clothes because the kid had somehow gotten taller in just a month. The medical supplies, the extra food, the basic necessities he'd never thought about before, like soap and toothbrushes and the special kind of blanket that didn't irritate their sensitive skin, it all added up. He'd started doing the math late at night while the kids slept. At his current burn rate, he had maybe 6 weeks before he'd be broke. And then what? Get evicted? Lose the cart? Watch these kids end up back on the streets? The thought made him physically sick. Blue had noticed. Of course she had. The kid noticed everything. Jake worried too much, she said one evening while helping him prep for the next day. She'd gotten good at slicing vegetables, her small hands surprisingly skilled with a knife. We can leave. Not be burden. You're not a burden, Jake said automatically. We are. You have no money because of us. You get in trouble because of us. Her voice was matter-of-fact, but her hands shook slightly as she chopped. We survived before. We survive again. Jake put down his spatula and turned to face her fully. Blue, listen to me. You're not going anywhere. We'll figure this out. How? She looked up at him with those 2 large eyes. You cannot work because we need you. You spend all money on us. Station manager is angry. How we figure out? Honestly, Jake had no idea. But he couldn't say that to a 12-year-old kid who'd already lost everything once. I'll think of something, he said instead. That night, lying on his coat-cushioned floor, Jake stared at the ceiling and tried to think of something. Anything. He could ask his sister for money, but she'd hung up on him the last 3 times he'd called. He could take out a loan, but his credit was garbage and no bank would touch him. He could. His thoughts were interrupted by movement. Blue had climbed out of bed and was sitting against the wall, her knees pulled to her chest. Can't sleep? Jake asked quietly. She shook her head. In the dim light from the station's corridor seeping under the door, he could see tears on her cheeks. You want to talk about it? For a long moment she said nothing. Then, in a whisper so soft he almost missed it, I miss my mother. Jake sat up. In all the weeks he'd known these kids, Blue had never mentioned family. Never talked about where they'd come from or what had happened to them. Where is she? He asked gently. I do not know. There was, bad people came. Explosions. Our guard Reed, he grabbed us. Said we had to run. He was shot. Blue's English faltered as emotion crept into her voice. He made us hide. Told us stay hidden until safe. But he died and we did not know what to do. We were so scared. How long ago was this? 5 months. Maybe 6. We ran to station because Reed said stations are safe. But we had no money, no identity cards. Could not tell anyone who we are because the bad people might find us. Reed said, her voice broke. Reed said if we tell they will kill us. Kill mother too if she's still alive. Jake's chest felt tight. Blue, your mom, is she looking for you? I think yes. I hope yes. But Galaxy is so big and we are so small. How she find us? Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. And now we ruin your life too. Everyone we touch, we ruin. Jake moved to sit beside her, careful not to crowd her space. Hey, look at me. You didn't ruin anything. You hear me? You 3 are the best thing that's happened to me on this stupid station. But you have no money. Money comes and goes. You know what doesn't come along very often? People worth spending it on. He meant it. Every word. We'll figure this out together. That's what families do. Blue looked at him sharply. Family? Jake hadn't meant to say that word. It had just slipped out. But looking at this kid who'd kept her siblings alive for months through sheer willpower, who helped him every day without being asked, who was so scared of being separated that she'd rather starve than risk authorities, yeah, it felt right. Yeah, he said. Family. Blue threw her arms around him and sobbed into his shoulder. Jake held her awkwardly, patting her back and making quiet shushing sounds like his own mom used to do, back before she'd passed. The next morning brought a miracle Jake didn't understand. His cart was swarmed. Not just busy, absolutely mobbed. A line stretched 20 people deep before he'd even finished setting up. And these weren't regular customers. They were wearing expensive clothes, carrying high-end luggage, speaking in the refined accents of the wealthy and connected. Heard this is the place, one well-dressed Centauri said, smiling knowingly. The human who helps those in need. Jake had no idea what that meant, but he took orders and cooked until his arms ached. Every single customer left massive tips. One elderly human woman pressed a 100-credit chip into his hand and whispered, "For the children. Keep doing good work." By end of day, Jake had made more money than his entire previous best week. He stood there staring at his credit reader, completely baffled, when Blue tugged on his sleeve. "Jake? Why so many people today?" "I have absolutely no idea, kid." But he wasn't going to question it. For the first time in weeks he could breathe a little easier. What Jake couldn't know, was that word had spread through very specific channels. Channels used by Valerian diplomats searching desperately for 3 missing children. Channels that had finally picked up a trail. The entire station shook when the warship arrived. Jake was elbow-deep in burger prep, slicing onions for the lunch rush, when the first tremor hit. The knife slipped in his hand, nearly taking off his thumb. Around him, other vendors grabbed their carts to keep merchandise from tumbling. Overhead, the station's ancient PA system crackled to life with a screech that made everyone wince. "Attention all station personnel. This is command. We have an unscheduled arrival. Repeat, unscheduled arrival. All security to level 1. This is not a drill." Jake wiped his hands on his apron and looked around. The docking district had gone quiet, that eerie kind of silence that happens when hundreds of people stop talking at once. Even the usual hum of machinery seemed muted. Then the screens lit up. Every advertisement display, every directory terminal, every public monitor in the district suddenly showed the same image. A massive ship sliding into the station's main docking bay. The thing was enormous, easily 10 times the size of the largest commercial vessel Jake had ever seen. Its hull was pearl white and seemed to shimmer with some kind of energy field, and along its side were symbols Jake didn't recognize but that made his stomach drop anyway. Military. That was definitely a military ship. "Holy hell," breathed Maria from her fruit stand. "That's a Valerian dreadnought." "Hey, what?" Jake asked. "Valerian. You know, the big empire that controls like half the outer colonies?" Maria was staring at the screen with wide eyes. "What's a ship like that doing at a dump like Terminus Station?" The PA system crackled again. "Attention. The Valerian Imperial vessel is carrying diplomatic personnel. All station residents are advised to continue normal operations. Security level has been elevated to maximum. That is all." The announcement did nothing to calm anyone's nerves. Normal operations? There was nothing normal about a warship that could probably vaporize the entire station appearing without warning. Jake tried to go back to his prep work, but his hands wouldn't stop shaking. Something felt wrong. Really wrong. And when he looked over at Blue, his stomach twisted into knots. She was standing completely still, staring at the screens with an expression Jake had never seen on her face before. Not fear exactly. Something more complicated. Her siblings had pressed close to her, the youngest one gripping Blue's hand so tight her knuckles had gone pale. "Blue?" Jake called out. "You okay?" She didn't answer. Didn't even seem to hear him. Her eyes were locked on that ship like nothing else in the universe existed. "Kid, what's wrong?" Blue finally turned to look at him, and Jake was shocked to see tears streaming down her face. But she wasn't sad. She was smiling. Actually smiling even as she cried. "Jake," she whispered. "Jake, I think." She never finished the sentence. They appeared at the end of the corridor like something out of a movie. A full squadron of armored soldiers in formation, their equipment gleaming under the station's lights. Their armor was the same pearl white as the ship, and they moved with the kind of precision that spoke of serious training. Each one carried weapons that looked like they could punch holes through reinforced hull plating. The crowd parted like they'd rehearsed it. People practically climbed over each other to get out of the way. The soldiers' boots hit the deck in perfect unison, a sound like thunder rolling through the district. They were heading straight for Jake's cart. Every instinct in Jake's body screamed at him to grab the kids and run. But his feet felt welded to the deck plates. He could only watch as the squadron got closer and closer. Their leader, a tall figure with more decorations on their armor, raised one hand in a stopping gesture. The soldiers halted 5 feet from the cart. The leader's helmet retracted with a soft hiss, revealing a woman's face. She had the same blue-tinted skin as the kids, the same large eyes, though hers were harder. Battle-tested. Jake Thompson? Her English was perfect, crisp, with an accent Jake couldn't place. Jake's mouth was dry. "Yeah, that's me. I am Captain Vess of the Valerian Imperial Guard. You are requested to accompany us to the Empress's ship." The Empress. Jake's brain was struggling to process words. "Listen, I don't know what this is about, but I haven't done anything. You are not under arrest, Mr. Thompson. This is a request, not a detention." Captain Vess's expression softened slightly. Though I should mention the request comes from the Empress herself. Refusing would be inadvisable. I'm not going anywhere without. Jake turned to gesture at the kids and found them already standing beside him. Blue had moved without him noticing, putting herself between her siblings and the soldiers. But she wasn't scared. She was standing tall, shoulders back, chin up, looking more regal than Jake had ever seen her. Captain Vess's eyes widened. She immediately dropped to one knee, and every soldier behind her did the same in a wave of clattering armor. Your Highness, Vess said, her voice thick with emotion. We've been searching for you. Your Highness? Jake's brain stuttered to a complete halt. He looked at Blue, this kid who'd been living in his apartment, washing dishes at his cart, wearing second-hand clothes, and couldn't process what he was hearing. Blue spoke and her voice had changed. The hesitant, careful English was gone. Now she sounded confident, commanding. Captain Vess. You may rise. These are my siblings, Princess Tessa and Prince Liam. We are unharmed. Prince. The words didn't make sense. Vess stood and Jake could see actual tears on the hardened soldier's face. Your mother will be overjoyed. She has not stopped searching since, Vess's voice caught. Since Captain Reed fell. Reed died protecting us, Blue said quietly. He was a hero. He was indeed, Your Highness. Vess turned back to Jake, and her expression had shifted to something like awe. Mr. Thompson, the Empress has requested your presence as well. Along with the royal children. Royal? Jake repeated stupidly. The kids are royalty. The Empress's children, yes sir. And you've been protecting them for? Vess looked to Blue for confirmation. 2 months, Blue? No, apparently an actual princess said. Jake gave us food when we were starving. Gave us shelter when we had nowhere to go. Kept us safe when we were hunted. Jake felt like the deck was tilting under his feet. You're a princess. You're all? He looked at Cheese and the littlest one. You're all royalty and you didn't think to mention this? We could not, Blue said, and now she sounded like a kid again, small and scared. The assassins who attacked us, they were looking for the royal family. If we told anyone who we were, we thought. Her voice broke. We thought they would find us and finish what they started. Jake's anger evaporated instantly. He put a hand on her shoulder. Hey, it's okay. I get it. Mr. Thompson, Captain Vess said gently. The Empress is waiting. Will you come? Jake looked at Blue, who nodded. Please, Jake. Come with us. You are safe, I promise. Against every ounce of common sense he possessed, Jake nodded. All right. But I'm leaving my grill on low. If this is some kind of weird arrest, I'm not losing my equipment. Captain Vess almost smiled. Your equipment will be perfectly safe, sir. The walk through the station was surreal. The soldiers formed a protective box around them, and crowds gathered to watch as they passed. Jake heard whispers. Is that the royal children? The Empress's kids? They were here the whole time? They passed through security checkpoints Jake didn't even know existed. Down corridors that were clearly restricted, past guards who saluted as Blue walked by. The station's regular chaos fell away, replaced by the quiet efficiency of military precision. And then they were at the docking bay airlock, and beyond it, Jake could see the interior of the warship. It was beautiful. There was no other word for it. Everything gleamed. The walls seemed to be made of polished crystal that caught light and reflected it in rainbow patterns. The air smelled different, cleaner somehow. A woman stood waiting in the receiving hall. She wore simple robes, not armor, but she carried herself with absolute authority. Her skin was the same blue as Blue's, her features similar but older, refined by time and responsibility. And her eyes, those same large, expressive eyes, were fixed on the 3 children with an intensity that made Jake's chest ache. Mother, Blue whispered. The Empress of the Valerian Empire, ruler of billions across dozens of systems, dropped to her knees and opened her arms. All 3 kids ran to her. Jake stood awkwardly in the corner of the most elegant room he'd ever seen, trying not to touch anything that probably cost more than his entire life savings. Crystal fixtures lined the walls, casting soft light that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The floor was some kind of polished stone that showed his reflection like still water. Even the air felt expensive. The Empress hadn't let go of her children for a solid 10 minutes. She knelt on that perfect floor in her formal robes, holding all 3 of them and crying openly while her guards and attendants pretended not to notice. Blue was sobbing into her mother's shoulder. The little one, Princess Tessa apparently, kept saying "Mama" over and over in their language. Even Cheese, Prince Liam, had tears streaming down his face. Captain Vess stood near Jake, also trying to be invisible. She'd removed her helmet again, and Jake could see her wiping her own eyes when she thought no one was looking. Finally, the Empress pulled back enough to look at her children properly. She touched their faces like she was memorizing them, her hands shaking. When she spoke, her voice was raw with emotion, but her English was flawless. I thought I had lost you. Every day for 6 months I thought you were dead. She kissed Blue's forehead, then Liam's, then Tessa's. Every single day. Reed kept us safe, Blue said. As long as he could. The Empress closed her eyes, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. Captain Reed was the finest soldier I have ever known. He will be honored as he deserves. She paused, struggling to compose herself. Tell me everything. Where have you been? How did you survive? The story came out in pieces with all 3 kids contributing. The diplomatic summit on Carillon Station. The explosion during the signing ceremony. Reed grabbing them and running while the palace guards fought off the assassins. The escape pod that malfunctioned, leaving them stranded on Terminus Station with no credits and no identification. Reed was shot when we reached the lower levels, Blue said quietly. He hit us in a maintenance shaft. Made us promise not to come out until the next day. He said if anyone asked, we should lie about who we were, because the assassins had infiltrated security. Her voice dropped to a whisper. We heard the shots. We knew he was gone. The Empress pulled her daughter close again. You obeyed his final command. You survived. That is what matters. We hid for weeks, Liam added. Ate from trash units. Slept in air ducts. Then we ran out of places to hide and we got so hungry. He looked at Jake. Then we found Jake. That's when the Empress seemed to remember Jake was in the room. She stood slowly, her movements graceful despite the emotion clearly overwhelming her, and turned to face him. Jake had never felt so scrutinized in his life. This woman ruled an empire. She commanded fleets. She made decisions that affected billions of lives. And she was looking at him like he was the most important person in the universe. Mr. Thompson, she said, and her voice cracked. You saved my children's lives. I just made them some burgers, Jake said, because his brain apparently stopped working when royalty talked to him. It wasn't, I mean anyone would've? No. The Empress shook her head firmly. Anyone would not have. My intelligence services report that approximately 3,000 people passed by my children during the time they spent in that docking district. Station surveillance shows hundreds saw them clearly. Not one stopped to help. Not one offered assistance. She took a step closer to Jake. Until you. Jake shuffled his feet, deeply uncomfortable. They were hungry kids. I had food. It's not complicated. It is exactly that simple, and that is what makes it extraordinary. The Empress glanced back at her children. You fed them when they were starving. You gave them shelter when they had none. You protected them, cared for them, spent your own limited resources on their welfare, and asked for nothing in return. They helped with the cart, Jake protested weakly. Blue made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. Jake, we washed dishes. You spent 500 credits on medicine for Tessa and 200 on clothes for Liam. You gave us your bed and slept on the floor for 2 months. You were about to lose your business because you kept closing early to take care of us. The Empress's eyes widened. You were sacrificing your livelihood? It's not a sacrifice if it's worth it, Jake said, and meant it. These kids, your kids, they're good people. Best thing that happened to me on that station. The Empress studied him for a long moment, and Jake saw something shift in her expression. Respect maybe. Or understanding. When she spoke again, her voice was formal, carrying the weight of her position. Mr. Thompson, I am Lyanna Val Kethris, Empress of the Valerian Commonwealth. And I am a mother who owes you a debt that can never be fully repaid. She placed her hand over her heart in what was clearly some kind of formal gesture. Name your price. Anything within my power to grant is yours. Jake blinked. My price. Wealth. Land. A position in my government. Citizenship in the Empire with all attendant privileges. A ship of your own. A title. Anything. Lyanna's expression was completely serious. I have the resources of 40 star systems at my command. What do you want? What did he want? Jake's mind raced through possibilities. He could ask for enough money to never worry again. A fancy restaurant instead of a beat-up food cart. A real apartment with actual rooms. Hell, he could ask for a mansion on some paradise world. But when he opened his mouth, what came out was, I just want to know they're okay. That they're safe. That's it. The Empress stared at him like he'd spoken a foreign language. You want nothing? She asked carefully. I want them to be safe and happy, Jake clarified. That's not nothing. That's everything. But it's not something you can pay me for. That's just how it should be. Lionna's eyes filled with tears again. She looked at Captain Vess, who was also staring at Jake with open shock. Then back to Jake. You would refuse the gratitude of an empire? I'm not refusing gratitude. I appreciate it really. But I didn't help your kids to get paid. I helped them because they needed help. Jake shrugged, feeling awkward. Taking money for that feels wrong. Then you are either the most honorable man I have ever met, or the most foolish, Lionna said, but she was smiling through her tears. Probably both, Jake admitted. Tessa, the youngest, tugged on her mother's robes. When Lionna bent down, Tessa whispered something in their language. The Empress listened, nodded, then looked at Jake with an expression that was almost mischievous. My daughter has a request. She would like to know if you will send her your recipe for chocolate chip cookies, as she has become quite fond of them and the palace chefs do not make them properly. Jake couldn't help but laugh. Yeah, I can do that. I'll write it down before I leave. And I would like the recipe for grilled cheese, Liam added quickly. Blue just smiled at him, that same small, fragile smile from their first meeting, but stronger now. Happier. Thank you, Jake. For everything. The Empress straightened again, and her expression shifted to something more formal. Mr. Thompson, if you will not accept material compensation, then please accept this. She gestured, and Captain Vess stepped forward with a small box. Inside was a crystal pendant on a silver chain. The crystal seemed to hold entire galaxies inside it, swirling with light and color. It was the most beautiful thing Jake had ever seen. The Star of Valor, Lionna explained. The highest civilian honor the Valerian Commonwealth can bestow. It is given only to those who have performed acts of extraordinary courage and compassion without thought of personal gain. She lifted the pendant and placed it around Jake's neck herself. You are only the 15th person in 300 years to receive this honor. And the first human. The crystal felt warm against Jake's chest. I don't know what to say. Say you will remember my children fondly. Say you will accept the friendship of the Valerian throne, now and always. Say that if you ever need anything, truly anything, you will not hesitate to ask. Lionna's voice dropped, becoming more personal. Say that you will visit sometimes, so my daughter can stop worrying that you are eating properly without her help. Jake looked at Blue, who was trying very hard not to cry again. Yeah. I can do all that. What happened next took weeks to fully unfold, but it started right there in that crystal chamber. The Empress made an official declaration of friendship between the Valerian Commonwealth and humanity, specifically citing Jake's actions as proof of humanity's fundamental decency. Trade agreements followed. Cultural exchanges. A formal alliance that political analysts would spend years discussing. But Jake missed most of that. He went back to his cart, back to his routine, back to his tiny apartment. The crystal pendant hung in his cart's window, catching light and making rainbow patterns that customers loved. His business exploded. Valerian diplomats made his cart a required stop when visiting the station. Traders from across the empire would detour specifically to eat his food and shake his hand. He hired help, expanded the menu, eventually saved enough to open a real restaurant. But he kept his prices fair. And he always set aside portions for any hungry kids who approached. Didn't matter what species. Didn't matter if they could pay. If they were hungry, Jake fed them. Blue and her siblings visited when they could, usually accompanied by enough security to make station management nervous. They'd sit at Jake's counter like old times, eating burgers and cookies and talking about everything and nothing. And sometimes, late at night when the station was quiet, Jake would touch the crystal at his throat and think about 3 scared kids who'd changed his entire life by simply being hungry at the right time. The galaxy would remember it as the beginning of the Human-Valorian Alliance, one of the most important diplomatic relationships in modern history. Political scholars would write papers about it. Historians would analyze it for generations. But Jake remembered it simpler. He'd made lunch for some kids who needed it. Everything else was just details. And really that was enough. Claude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.